would be nice, assuming that you had a relationship with them when you were younger. When did you first discover the Goodies? A good place to start.
Yeah.
Maybe when.
I mean, it's yeah. It's hard to say when I first discovered the Goodies. I think they were almost always there. I remember the Funky Gibbon I was very into, and I thought it was earlier than it was, but I think it was about 76, wasn't it? That's one of my clearest memories of. I remember Graham Garden doing the Gibbon paw thing on top of the pops, but it was weird because with my generation, obviously when I was in the mid-70s, I was only 6 or 7 or 8, and I was too young for Python, and so the Goodies were actually my introduction to that style of comedy. I guess that and Tiz was, which is probably a little bit later. And it was, it was on at tea time so kids could watch it. So I think for a lot of people of my age, the Goodies were this phenomenon where they weren't really like Monty Python, but they were of that same genre. But and they were obviously looking back at it, they were sort of referencing a lot of stuff from the 20s and 30s and a lot of slapstick and all sorts of stuff in there. But yeah, they were the first because they were on at tea time. They were one of the first kind of comedy stuff that I really got into. On all the time they were on. I mean, I remember one time I lived in Cheddar by then, so I must have been like 10 or 11, and there was a big thunderstorm, and the Goodies was on that night, and Blake Seven was on that night, and they both kind of went off the air because all the aerials went down, and there was no way in those days of ever seeing those shows ever again. I remember how gutted and disappointed I was to miss an episode of the Goodies and Blake Seven. And I still remember that to this day. So they were this really important force in that, and I love the relation between the three of them. I mean, I really remember the one where they were all trapped in the bunker, and the three of them had to sort of create a new society. And I seem to remember Bill Oddie coming out, getting older and older, and singing how old he was and that sort of stuff. So those things really stuck in your mind. The gunfight with the sauce bottles. I mean, as a kid, those sort of things are so memorable. And I guess the Golden Goose and that sort of whole pantomime one, which they did repeat a few times, so that came up a few times. So it was just that anarchy. It's like a human cartoon, isn't it? And obviously the cat up the post office tower and all that stuff as well. But all those things, they're such strong visuals and they're such strong ideas that all that stuff really stuck with me, and I can clearly remember. It'd be interesting to go back and work out what year those things were broadcast, because they were never repeated. And I kind of have this empathy with them, because they and Doctor Who and Me and Stu were shows that the BBC sort of didn't really like and never repeated. And they still haven't repeated Us and the Goodies, and they still haven't brought back Us and the Goodies. But hold on, sorry. I might not.
The Goodies. So that's kind of a good summary about that. Just Tim, Bill, and Graeme.
Yeah.
Do you have any relationship with them? Do you know them, or do you want to talk a bit about?
Yeah.
Bill and Graeme?
I know. You're still rolling, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry.
I know Graeme best of all through the Slapstick Festival already. So I've met Graeme a few times and gone out for curries with him, and it was actually lovely seeing the Goodies at the Leicester Square Theatre thing they did for their DVD release. They did a big interview with Stuart Lee. I mean, you're going to choose someone from Lee and Herring to do an interview at the Leicester Square Theatre. Do you choose Stuart Lee? They're making up for it now by having me on this one. Graeme is such a witty man. He's very quiet and softly spoken, but it's been lovely meeting him a few times, because I've been able to talk to him a little bit about the Goodies, and he's not someone who's broadcasting it, but when you get him on your own and just have a little chat with him, he's very open about it. So I'm really looking forward to talk to him, and he's a very witty man. And not that the other two aren't, but with Graeme, it's because he's so quiet, and then everything he says is this carefully thought out bon mot, really. Whereas Bill, who I met him a couple of times, just in passing. And the nice thing about Bill, we did a joke about him on Fist of Fun, like in the first episode, I think of Fist of Fun, about his bird fancying and how far that went, how much he fancied birds, the feathered birds. And he very kindly sort of sent me a signed photo of himself and said thank you for the mention, or was joined in with the joke. And it wasn't like a mean joke, but it was a slightly rude joke. So that was nice. And then I've bumped into him on occasions. Tim, I don't think I've ever met, apart from when I asked him a question at the DVD launch thing. So don't think so. We did once. We were asked. We were big fans of the Goodies, and we were often like mildly compared to them. And I can remember being interviewed earlier on, and someone asked us who's our least favourite of the Goodies, and it was something like that. And so I said Tim was my least favourite one, and then he sort of responded in the paper, said I've never heard of Graeme and Herring and blah blah blah. So I hope he won't hold that against me. We were sort of lured into a trap, and he wasn't. I think actually the interesting thing when I was a kid. I think you really like as a kid you really like Bill Oddie because Bill is the child in the group, but Tim was also like the because he was the pompous sort of conservative. They played these sort of three classes really throughout of the UK. There was Bill was ostensibly working class, and Graeme was sort of scientist middle class, and Tim was this sort of upper class prig, an idiot. And so I did really love him in the Goodies. So it wasn't even true what I said about him. But so yeah, it'd be really lovely to spend some quality time with talking to all three of them. And when they were together for that other interview, that whole relationship was still really there. And Bill will talk a lot, and Graeme won't talk very much, and Tim's do. They still slip into those roles, which is really interesting. But they're all still, they've all still got it, and they're all still really funny. So it's going to be a really great event, I think.
So is the little boy, like little Richard, excited to be having all three Goodies on stage and having that experience?
Yeah, all these things where I get to talk to my comedy heroes, and I am a comedy fan and I'm a comedy nerd, really, And that was when I was a kid. Comedy was everything for me. I grew up in Somerset. I couldn't go out anywhere. I could never. It was just the comedians I saw on TV. I wasn't really interested in pop music like everyone else was. I was interested in comedy. So through like TV and LPs, and that was it. And occasionally a film, you'd get to see these guys. So if you could go back to that kid and say, hey, one day you're going to talk to the Goodies and for an hour, and they're going to have to listen to you and answer your questions, that would blow my mind. And even as a 51-year-old man, it is pretty much blows my mind. So out of all of them, I'm probably most excited about talking to the Goodies just because of that long, nearly half a century connection with these guys. It's sort of insane, really, when you think of it like that. I think there's a lot of interesting things to talk about them, about the move to ITV, how whether that affected their career, whether that's why the BBC seemed to sort of turn against them. It's sort of this odd relationship they've had with the BBC, and I know there's interesting things about the Goodies because obviously, like, you look back at some of it and go, in the 40 years later, you wouldn't do that kind of comedy on TV. But I don't think it was ever mean-spirited or nasty when they were. It'd be interesting to see. I haven't watched it all back, but it was. I think there was, when you look at something like The Comedians, which was a show that I watched a lot in the 70s. That was nasty comedy, and there was a lot of racial and sexual and sexist and homophobic stuff. I've watched a lot of Python, and there's a little bit of it in that even. So there's a pretty sort of surprise. So you can't really judge something by today's standards when it's a historical piece, as this sort of thing is now. But it'll be interesting to talk to them about that, why they feel the BBC sort of shunned them, and whether it's just literally because they went to another channel, which I think it probably is. So there's lots to ask them about, but also it'd be interesting to hear that, back in those days of no health and safety, and they were just doing crazy stunts and damaging themselves by all accounts. And I'd like to ask the Goodies where they get their crazy ideas from, because when we were asked that question, me and Stu, in the 90s, we always said we copied them off the Goodies. So it'll be interesting to find out where the Goodies got their ideas from.